Welcome to the live Clean Beauty podcast event in partnership with The Race. And I am your friendly host, Elise.
And Wondrous.
And we are your official self-care kickback podcast. We are two best friends. We go all the way back to freshman year in college at Temple University. See you. And we bring you topics on all things and show you how self-care plays a role in it.
One of the things I love most about our friendship is that we always find a way to turn lemons into lemonade. And in the midst of our individual lives, celebrations, obstacles, and all things adult, and Elise and I have always been there for each other. The best lemonade in life we found is self-care. And so our episodes are just like our friendship, a whole entire conversation.
All day, every day. And today we have a very special episode in partnership with The Race that is hosted in Atlanta, Georgia. And for those who don't know, The Race is a half marathon and 5K weekend event held from October 1st through the 4th. It highlights and supports Black-owned businesses, neighborhoods, and charities. Y'all, what they are doing is critical in the community as far as not just being a running event, but being dedicated to unity and Black excellence. So today, our episode is presented during their virtual expo series, excelled by Citizens Trust Bank, and the entire virtual expo is excelled by Juvari. The Race 2021 is the largest demonstration of unity in the running community led by Black distance runners and walkers worldwide.
We have to take a pause there. That is amazing. And what year is this year?
It is year number 4, lucky number 4. So excited to be wearing a legacy shirt. To all who don't know, their legacy year was 2018.
Trying to get my shirt to show. And we just have to make mention of the amazing pivot that the race took last year during the midst of everything that was going on. It was crazy, as we all know. We're still going through a lot of craziness, but the race found a way to make it work by having the virtual component that allowed people to stay where they were, stay socially distanced, and continue on with what we had going on. And I loved it because I wasn't obviously able to come from Florida, and I was able to participate in this race virtually. So it was amazing. And I love the live feed and feeling like you were there. And that's that community part that the race is all about.
Definitely. And being sensitive to what's really happening and what's current. And this year, we're excited to have a hybrid event. We are coming back in person, but we also understand that people need virtual. So that's why we have our virtual option. So we are so grateful to welcome our 2 guest panelists into this conversation. So please allow us to introduce our special guest to you, starting with the lovely Paige Gaines. She is a sought-after speaker and prominent mental health activist who is the founder and CEO of 911 Sane Incorporated. She is a 2-time suicide survivor, diagnosed with bipolar disorder at the age of 22, making her life's journey full of adversity, strength, and impact. She holds a bachelor's in public education and understands the importance of community, education, and awareness.
Welcome, Paige.
Welcome.
Thank you for being here. And we also have, we're so excited to have you. Thank you. And we also have with us here today, Ms. Erica James Strayhorn. And she's no stranger, as she's previously led the mental health speaker series events for the race for the first 2 years. Yeah. And she's a licensed family and marriage therapist in Atlanta, Georgia. And in 2016, Erica developed a private practice called Erica James Counseling, LLC. Her services are geared towards adults, individuals, and couples who are motivated to heal, release disempowering narratives, and find balance in their lives. Her specialties include anxiety, depression, stress, work-life balance, confidence, anger, organization, and sexual empowerment, and assisting clients to create individualized self-care plans, which is amazing. So welcome to you, Erica.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about this conversation.
We are too. And so we want to just thank both of you again for being here and open up the floor for you both to share a little something about yourselves that we may have left out, or even maybe a favorite self-care activity that you enjoy.
So yeah, I would share a favorite self-care activity. For me right now, it's sleep, because I have a 9-month-old, and we're just getting into that phase of her sleeping mostly through the night. So that's been really exciting. I felt a difference. Like, when they're not sleeping through the night, you still get up and you do what you have to do through the day. But now that she is sleeping through the night, I can really feel like a whole new person every day. So
great. Yes.
Yeah, that simple basic self-care of getting sleep, like that's my favorite self-care activity right now.
I can attest to that. How about you, Paige?
I'm trying to think. So I have like things I do regularly. So I meditate a lot and I journal a lot, but I kind of this doesn't sound great, but I backed off of reading. I wasn't reading that much. So I am doing that more and I'm really enjoying it. It's very calming. So that's definitely a new self-care activity that I am getting back into. So yeah, I'm enjoying that.
I love it. I love it. It's funny you said, Erica, that you said sleep, because I just listen to a TED Talk. I got on a podcast, TED Talk tick, and you just listen to it and just keep going and keep going. And it was talking about the importance of sleep, and I'm just in a new role transitioning, and it was saying that you need sleep. Otherwise, it's hard for you to retain new information. And I'm learning a whole lot. And so I was like, oh my God, I can't wake up at the crack of dawn with only 4 hours of sleep anymore.
Right. You cannot. And one of the things that you said, Paige, about the reading and how meditative that is, I kind of lost touch. I've been doing audiobooks. And I love audiobooks. I love podcasts. I love listening to things. But recently I picked up a physical book, which I haven't done in a while. And I'm carrying this book around with me, like at work, like I'm reading it, even if I get like a few minutes, and I feel good about that. Like it feels good to actually flip a page, in a book.
Yeah, it really does. I've been enjoying it, so for sure.
Awesome. So we're going to get into our little segment that we do, which is called a QB spin. We take a topic, a current event, and you spin it positive, or we just talk it through, pick it apart a little bit. So I'm going to do it on two. Number one, we have to plug, and we can't forget about the race weekend, right? So it's what the race is doing is critical, and it's also impactful. Getting people to move, doing charity work, and having that sense of community. And the fact that we have so many awesome wellness-based sponsors and vendors that support and encourage that self-care behavior, helping people throughout their times, making their lives better. I just want to give them a quick highlight, because I think it's important that they be highlighted during this virtual expo series. All of the runners who are a part of this need to go and shop for these vendors. They're going to be highlighted throughout the entire month of October. They're going to be on the Event Hub virtual expo. So if you're in person, go back and take a look at what they have to offer. And some of our wellness sponsors and vendors that we do have, I want to just take a moment. It's Lululemon. Our official water sponsor is Alcavita. Pro Black Vitamins, Nutrition Prescriptions, Hello Health, Iwi Fresh, Enda Running, Kika Stretch Studios, Air PT to PR, Relieve It, and last but not least, Run Social Atlanta. That, for those who don't know, Run Social is a business owned by Temilola Sobomihan Marshall, who is the owner of Running Nerds that puts on the race. So there you go. And the next topic I want to talk about, and Paige, I'd like you to definitely jump in on this. We talked when we first had a conversation about why we decided to be a mental health first aider. And I have recently found some stats, because I became a mental health first aider as well in 2021 through my job. They offered it, and it was an initiative to have employees be well-being mental health champions within the company. But one of my whys was because my line of work was working with people who went through traumatic accidents, and I wanted to be able to connect and have encouraging conversations with people who are going through life-altering events. And but they shared a couple stats that I thought was pretty interesting to start this conversation. And it was that 123 people die every day from suicide. From 1999 to 2016, 630,000 people have died from drug overdose. And then the last stat was nearly 1 in 5 adults live with mental health. And then understanding, we've had some people in media that we know, like the DMX and Michael K. Williams that recently died of drug overdose. I thought it was just an interesting topic to bring out to the floor to hear what comes to mind when you hear these stats.
It's two things. It's two ways for me. It makes me sad, right? To hear how many individuals are passing by suicide, to hear how many people are being affected by drug overdose. But it also excites me because this information is being documented properly, finally, and the information is being shared, and we now have numbers to put along with our story. So we can share, like, just speaking personally, I can share my personal experience as much as I can, but it also helps for me to have this number and this research behind it to share, like, this is what's going on outside of me. This is what's going on in our community. This is what's going on in your community. These are the numbers. So, it makes me, it's saddening, but it's also a space of progression, and that we are moving in the right direction to where we can talk about it in this conversation. Where just a few years ago, I would not have known the numbers that I've known now. And I've been in mental health going on 6 years now. Gosh, yeah. So, just like I said, just a few short years ago, I was not as educated as I am now, but given the opportunities that I've had, I'm definitely a lot more enlightened. So no, I appreciate it.
It's kind of staggering that it's, 1 in 5 adults who are living with mental illness. And it seems like and I don't know what the stats are, but I wonder how many are going undiagnosed. And because it's a lot of people. I mean, that's something, there's something to say about that when there's 1 in 5. I think the biggest thing that can be said is that we need to normalize, like you said, talking about it and sharing the information, because you might have someone who is that first aid, mental health first aider who can probably help guide someone towards a resource to just kind of help guide them along their experience if they are dealing with one of these mental illnesses. So knowing that the numbers are as great as they are, as big as they are, it's more of like an urgency to normalize the discussion,
Yeah.
Yeah, and having the numbers, understanding that I totally feel compassion and, sadness that people are having these challenges. And it's interesting when you do have a certain number of data collection data points, then a lot of times you do get more attention to something, you get more awareness, and there can be more funding and more support for these challenges.
Yes.
So it's almost like a weird feedback loop where it's like, we may know that people are having challenges, but until it hits a certain number, until it hits a certain tipping point, then there's not really a whole lot that is done on a larger scale. But then once a certain number is hit, okay, now we see this amount of people are challenged with these things. Now let's kind of throw some research or some support or some money around it. And ultimately that will help so many more people to access the resources that they need for support.
That's right. It's a great point.
Definitely is a great point. And we talk about resources and not being so reactive with everything.
Yes, right.
And, when are we going to get to that point with being proactive? But the numbers, like you hit that nail, like the numbers they are telling, and they are supportive for those organizations that have been doing the work for so many years to try to get funding. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you, ladies, for participating in our little exercise. Yeah, so we have 3 questions for you all, and we're gonna frame it to one person first, but it's really just to get us started and just have another conversation on it. So our first question is for Paige. How do you realize what your triggers were throughout your mental health journey?
It really took therapy for me to sit down and increase my self-awareness to say, okay, this is my trigger. But I started off with the triggers that, I started recognizing the triggers that I was unable to control. So living with bipolar disorder, one of my biggest triggers is the weather. And that's something I have no control over. So recognizing that and seeing that it's going to be really hot today or tomorrow it's going to be really cold, especially being in Georgia, our weather just goes like back and forth a lot. So it really can affect my mood. But that was something that I learned through therapy and something my therapist pointed out for me. In addition to that, a lot of my triggers were directly related to my personal trauma and my childhood trauma. So again, walking through that in therapy, I was able to recognize my triggers that way. Another way I was able to do so was just by meditation and seeing what calmed me down, seeing what things I needed to remove from my life, in addition to journaling. So I know those are the two things that people love or they hate. So it's just like, I love to meditate or I hate to meditate, or I love to journal or I hate to journal. I love to do both, and I'm grateful because they're free. And I love free help.
They are free. That is such a free resource.
It is a free resource. It's free. It's free. It's free. There are even apps on your phone that are free that'll help you do so. But they definitely played a huge part in me learning my triggers, in addition to me learning to cope with them and kind of removing them from my life altogether. So I still have triggers now. I'm not going to say they're completely obsolete, but they're not as grand as they used to be. And many of them are triggers that are really out of my control.
Got it. That's interesting. Quandris and I were talking about, I think, what was it? Coping strategies versus, what was the other part? I can't remember. It was like coping strategies versus self-care. And what's that difference? Is there a difference?
Well, it depends. So it definitely can be a difference. I think coping strategies are typically specific to a trigger or to a specific emotion you may be feeling or feeling overwhelmed. And so you can create certain coping strategies or certain coping skills to help mitigate and manage whatever may be coming up for you for a specific situation or a specific trigger. Self-care, now maybe one of those coping strategies may be self-care. However, there is a difference in that, self-care is, I think it could be a kind of a gray area because, again, some of your coping strategies or coping skills could be considered self-care because if, journaling is a great coping strategy. Meditating can be too, again, depending on what the triggering issue is. For someone who is engaging in those activities without the trigger, so they're just meditating or journaling because they just feel moved to do so, that is more so in the pure self-care of it. But again, if journaling or meditating or anything that you may consider a self-care activity, if that helps you move through some time when you're triggered, that can also be thought of or looked at as a coping skill as well. So they can be interchangeable, they can go hand in hand.
That's good. That's really good because we kept trying to figure out and divide it up, and we kind of came up with what you said, like I guess self-care is more like routine, like maintenance, like you kind of do it more so on a regular basis, and then you pull those coping skills out when you really need them, when something's happening. Big
I think the way to think of it too is like a coping skill could be looked at as a reaction to a trigger. So let's say the trigger happened and you start to feel whatever emotions come up. Okay, now let me reach for this coping skill. Or even let's say you know that a trigger is going to present itself soon. So let me go and get ahead of it and use this coping skill to calm myself down so I'm not triggered, or I'm not triggered in a high way or in a really intense way. So I think that's how you can look at a coping skill is more like a reactive kind of situation, and a self-care activity could be looked at more as proactive or even as a response to stress, because there's a difference between reacting and responding, right? Reacting is more of an emotional space, like an emotional quick thought or quick action. Responding is when you have a chance to kind of take a pause, take a breath, and then make a choice from that space. And so I think sometimes self-care can be looked at in a proactive way or a response to something. And then the coping skills, coping strategies. I keep wanting to say strategy, skill and strategy. Coping strategy could be seen as like a reactive sort of tool or situation.
I think that's,
so I have a,
yeah.
Oh, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I think it's telling for me, though. It makes me think that the trigger is more like a self-awareness. You have to know yourself. You have to know what's going on with you.
Absolutely. And I think like what Paige said, it was helpful. Her therapist is someone who helped her identify what her triggers are, because when you're so close to it, and when you've been triggered by the same thing so many times, it's really hard for you to zoom out and see the bigger picture and see like all the parts that are connected to it. Yeah. When you're working with somebody who's trained in helping you see those patterns, like for me, a lot of times I can identify a client's triggers in the first 10 minutes talking to them. And so then it's not for me to say, hey, this is your trigger. It's along the way, working with them, helping them to realize it for themselves that, you know, these are my triggers, and to really illuminate the patterns and to see how when A happens, B usually happens. And when D happens, C usually happens. And, you know, it's not anything personal. It's more so like, this is what's happening due to any things you may have experienced in childhood. Maybe you've gone through some traumas. You know, there's reasons why certain triggers are the way they are. And once we identify what those triggers are and you have that awareness, then sometimes we can backtrack and talk about, why is this a trigger in the first place?
Right.
Right. Getting more and deeper into that self-awareness of the trigger.
Right.
So I have a quick question when it comes to, I know that a lot of the self-care activities can overlap with the coping strategies. But are there what are some coping strategies that are more so just coping strategy and not so much on the self-care side?
The one that comes to mind for me is one where you have a rubber band on your wrist, and it can help you manage frustration, anxiety, stress, or really kind of get you back to the present moment. And you pop the rubber band on your wrist. That's more of a coping strategy, in my opinion, like a pure coping strategy. I really can't see where popping the rubber band on your wrist could be seen as self-care.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
That was really, really good. And so, you know, one of the things about in thinking of awareness and thinking of the triggers and how many people are impacted by them, it affects people from all different walks of life, right? It's like we're not coming down, and mental challenges and mental things that people go through are only going to certain types of people. It's everyone. Right. One of the things about the race itself is that it has runners from all over the country, right? Yeah. It had over 33 states, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And these runners, they're working in a broad range of industries, from teachers, artists, lawyers, and doctors. We have just a whole wealth of people. And so it's good that the race is, again, bringing people together from diverse industry settings. Definitely. All to one area to commune in this type of way when it comes to the race and nutrition and just working together. So I want to kind of segue there to the next topic where, in speaking of like people from different industries. And so this question is going to go so more towards you, Erica. Okay. And talking about like the everyday life. So what's your take on creating like a healthy work-life balance? And especially since we're talking about people across all different broad ranges of industry, and really during like the pandemic transitions, because I feel like we were kind of struggling with work-life balance before the pandemic.
Right.
And now we're in the pandemic and people were home and then they went back, or some people went back, and then you got people isolatedly coming back, you know, based off of if something's happening in their building or at their workplace, and then going back and so it's like a lot of back and forth.
Right.
So I guess I'm just wondering and want to know your take on that and creating work-life balance through these transitions.
Yeah, so my biggest takeaway from creating work-life balance are two things. The first thing is to keep it simple, like keep it really, really simple, especially if you are starting a new self-care plan or you are starting just to figure out what work-life balance looks like for you. So starting really simple. And then especially too, if you're kind of going back and forth from the office back into the home and back into the office as we're trying to navigate the pandemic experience. So keeping it simple is really important. And then being flexible is also the second thing. I think for a lot of people, most people, a lot of us, once we kind of get our mind on something, we're like, okay, I'm going to do that. And we can sometimes overdo things, even self-care. And so I have a tendency, even myself, to, okay, my morning routine is going to have like 20 things in it. And by the time my morning routine is over, it's like afternoon. And I've done all this self-care, but now I'm kind of stressed out because there were several other items I needed to take care of, but I couldn't because I'm over here self-caring. So I think it's important to start really simple and not judge yourself for that. So, and when I say simple, I mean like scaling it all the way back to, are you drinking enough water? Are you moving your body? Are you eating things that add to the health of your body? Are you getting enough sleep? Like basic stuff. And once you get those things consistent, and just choose one of those. Right. Let me just focus on the water. Once you start drinking water consistently, then you can add something else on. A lot of times we're like, because self-care is like, it's a trending topic right now. It's really cute, you know, it's a little cute, all your cute little stuff, and post about it on social media, which is wonderful. But you have to figure out what's really going to be practical and what's going to work for you. And so the flexibility comes in where, let's say you do choose water and you try, you know, I'm gonna try to drink this water for this week. And you get to the end of the week and you're like, you know what, I'm still thirsty. I have not drank any water. Maybe I need to choose a different self-care activity that I can actually successfully do. So maybe it's just waking up 5 minutes earlier and not even doing anything for that 5 minutes. Like, I'm not going to journal. I'm not going to meditate. I'm just going to be awake 5 minutes earlier. Like, scaling it all the way back and not judging yourself for having to do that. And then once you get consistent and you build confidence with doing that one item, then you can add more to it. So simple and flexibility, I think, are the two things that can be really helpful when you're trying to figure out your work-life balance.
Yeah, I really, really like that a lot. I like it. Sounds sustainable because, like you said, we can definitely get ourselves in
sustainable initiatives.
Yes.
Just did the water. I feel like you are the pastor at the church, Erica. I just did the water thing earlier last week, and by Thursday,
I have this big old gallon jug of water, and it's just like now I'm not looking at it. Right. It's like intimidating me, and I like that you said,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Not judging yourself for it is super important. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say I have the water jug like with the supportive words by it, like keep going.
That's what I have.
With the time clock,
right? With the time,
more pressure. Yeah, I'm like, it's 12 o'clock. I haven't had 3 sips, and I'm behind like the whole jug. Yeah, it's a lot of pressure. So I appreciate that.
No, it was intended to like be encouraging, but then you do, like, to your point, feel sad when you're at 7 a.m. and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Like, oh, I'm here thirsty.
Right. And like you said, you have to be flexible enough to change the routine, because I was fine just going and filling up my little cups, and it got me out of my seat, you know, so that I wasn't sitting, you know, the whole day. I got to get up and walk, go get my water, and then come and sit back down. So I'm happy you say, like, don't judge yourself, because I think
no judgment, because the judgment it negates all the amazing work that you did. So maybe you didn't drink it at every hour of the day that's on your jug, but you did drink the whole bottle. But now, since you were late or you're behind, you judge yourself, you beat yourself up for it. That judgment sticks around longer than the benefits from the water. So do what you can, love yourself, be compassionate, drink as much water as you can. And if you need to switch from the gallon jugs just back to the cup, that's fine too.
Especially if you are at the office, and if you are back in the office and you run into the bathroom because you just downsed a whole jug of water because you're trying to make up for the minutes.
Exactly.
All right. So I want to segue just a little on the fact that major impact life events do take a toll on families and as far as mental health challenges are concerned. And also with the race, we've got generations running the race. We've got families crossing the finish line, moms and couples and kids. And it's always good to see the Black family unit be a unit, even though we know that the Black family has been historically and continues to be in some aspects under attack in different ways. So, and this is just to open the floor on a conversation. Like, how do major life events impact our families from a personal level or from just a mental health in general level?
I would say that a lot of my clients come to me because they're moving through some sort of transition, whether it's a transition with a job, maybe somebody passed away, or maybe they have a new family member, maybe somebody got married, got divorced. All the different sorts of things that happen to us that are transitions can create the space to your equilibrium's off. You know, maybe you felt like you were on a solid foundation and now this major thing happened and now the foundation has kind of been pulled from up under you. And there's actually a diagnosis called adjustment disorder that it allows you to acknowledge and understand how impactful transitions are, but it only lasts, the diagnosis itself only sticks around for about 6 months or so. And then after that 6 months comes, then you can check in with it again and see, because sometimes when you're dealing with a major transition, you can start to exhibit behaviors, patterns, emotions that mimic other mental health diagnoses and disorders. And it could just be because that's what's showing up as you're moving through this transition. Or as time goes on, it could be like, yes, this is an actual verifiable mental health diagnosis. So I think that just goes to show you how impactful certain transitions can be, where they can, you start exhibiting certain behaviors, start just experiencing yourself in a different way, and people around you may start seeing you behave in a different way. And I think that's where we can invite a lot of compassion into our lives and just allow each other some more kindness when you are dealing with any sort of transition, and also realizing that if it is impacting your mental health in a certain way, there is support, there are resources out there for you to go, for you to experience and for you to access, because life transitions can be pretty tough depending on what the transition is.
So I have kind of two questions, because that was interesting. It was a lot. I'm like, my mind is like moving a lot based off of what you said. So you said that adjustment disorder usually is about 6 months for that major life event, that you can kind of sit in that space before you want to go and kind of reevaluate it. So if you have more than one life event happening at a time, does that increase the length of time of the disorder, or is it still kind of in that 6 month range?
You kind of look at it as in 6 month like chunks. So once you get towards the end of the 6 months, if the patient is still, or the client is still exhibiting certain behaviors, and you realize it's like a compound trauma or a complex transition where there's multiple things happening, then it's up to the discretion of the mental health professional, and as they have conversations with the client, to determine if this isn't going to be an ongoing thing. Do we keep it there for another 6 months? Do we change it into a different sort of diagnosis? But it really is based off the individual person and what sort of behaviors or symptoms they're exhibiting.
Okay. Now,
I'll go on.
Go ahead, because I was gonna. Yeah.
What kind of major life events would you say have like the biggest strains on families? And I'm only asking because we're talking a lot about self-awareness, and I feel like sometimes people in general could put themselves in like isolated situations where they think they're the only person going through this thing and don't really identify it as it being an issue. And so I'm guessing maybe if we knew what some of those big transitions are, or maybe the biggest that puts big strains on the families, that it might be enlightening for, that's all.
Well, what I'll say to that is every family is different and unique, just as every individual is unique. So one family may experience a transition and be just fine with it. Another family could experience the very same transition. It can rip them apart. But in general, we do have those that are really impactful, like if there's a divorce in the family, if there's any sort of death, or especially an unexpected death, or a death that we kind of, someone was ill over time, you kind of have been preparing for them to pass away, it still can be a really challenging transition. Sometimes a new baby entering the family can be a challenging transition, depending on the circumstances, depending on, babies are lovely and wonderful and joyous, and it's an adjustment to have a baby in a house. If somebody just recently married, really any sort of transition that happens, any major life transition can have the potential to be just challenging or traumatic for a family. So I don't know if there's the one that comes to my mind right now is like the biggest thing would be like a divorce or like parents splitting up, but because that can create a lot of different ripple effects. But really any sort of major life transition has the potential to have some major ripple effects in the family.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. Thanks for sharing. So I want to ask Paige, just as far as understanding your journey, being a 2-time suicide survivor, can you walk us through what that was like for you and for your family?
No, absolutely. And I'm happy that we're having this conversation, because when you initially asked the question, I'm like, what would be like a major, life impact that I've had? And I'm like, obviously, a lot of different things as I was thinking about it. But I think the biggest one was actually my diagnosis, and seeing the impact that it had on not just my immediate family, but my church family and my family that was like my cousins and my aunts, because I was hospitalized. So it wasn't necessarily a secretive thing. The topic was a secret in our family, such as mental health, but the situation wasn't a secret in itself. So it's like, oh, well, she was in the hospital. She's in the hospital because of that. So that was the situation that we were dealing with. But it put us in a place of either we're going to deal with it or we're not. And so my parents were in the position of either we're going to deal with it together or we're going to deal with it separately. And they actually did it separately. My mom took a more educational approach. So she bought every book in the world. Like every day there was a book on our front step. When I was in aftercare, they would have different organizations there with books, and she was just buying all these different books. Whereas my father took more so the hands-on approach, and he spent a lot more one-on-one time with me and learned my diagnosis just face to face. Whereas my mom read about it, and they came together in that space. But I think one of the biggest things that got us through that, again, I'm a huge advocate for therapy. So I love just hearing everything that we're talking about surrounding it, because I think having somebody to walk you through those different challenges and that transition space, it provides you with those skills, but it also gives you that space of having a voice and validating those feelings. And even doing so when it came to my suicide attempt, my first one, I was 12. But my parents didn't find out about it until I was 22 years old. So by that point, I was kind of like, it's a little late and I have all these other things going on. So I'm not really sure why it's still important to even talk about it. But just that in my diagnosis process, it really had a huge impact to where my brother was in therapy with me at some moment. I had to talk with a lot of friends. So it had a huge impact on my life. I lost a lot of friends. I gained more friends. I lost close relationships with family members, but I also was able to gain stronger relationships with family members. So I think staying true to what I knew to be best, which was my personal health, and really dedicating myself to that and dedicating my every action to my health and the betterment, and just knowing I want it better. Knowing I want it better for myself, knowing I want it more than just a diagnosis, knowing I wanted what a lot of doctors at that point in time said I wouldn't have, which was stability, or you probably won't be able to hold a 9-to-5 job, or you probably won't have like the healthiest relationships. There are a lot of limitations that were put on me, and I wanted more than what I was told I could have. So I've never been one to like somebody tell me what I could do. So that definitely wasn't going to go over well with me, telling me what I could do because of my diagnosis. So being able to overcome all of that together as a family, because I did not do it by myself. We had a lot of hard times, but we pulled through. And I think that's the power of my story, knowing that it's just not me. Like my parents have a story as well. And it's actually, I've heard it a few times because I usually do most of the speaking. So when they do have their engagements, I tear up because I'm like, I forget y'all were a part of this. Like, oh, y'all were there. And to hear their side, it's like, wow, like I couldn't imagine. I don't have kids, but I couldn't imagine seeing my child go through something that, you can't really help them in. That has to be, a lot of it has to be their decision to take their treatment seriously. So I love that we're even having this conversation, because it really sparked something in my mind. Like, oh, wow, it was like a family trauma almost. Being diagnosed was a very challenging, traumatic experience. And I think it was just not for me, but for my family as well.
That's a great point, and that's super insightful, because I think we always think about the person who's having the trauma, not the people who love them, who are dealing with it. I think the first, my first thought when I hear the word suicide is the person who attempted the suicide. I really just, that's just super insightful for me. I don't think about that ripple effect.
And Paige, I really love what you said about therapy being a space that was just for you to feel like you were heard and seen and to validate your experience. And being a therapist for as long as I have, there's so many different techniques and tools and education and theories and like all those things, which are beautiful and amazing. However, I feel like one of the most important indicators of how well the client will do with the therapist and what sort of healing they'll get from the therapy is if they feel like this space is just for them and they know they can just come and talk about whatever it is they want to talk about for that time. And it's not going to go beyond those walls. It's not going to be any judgment. The therapist is going to be right there with you, validating your experiences, because depending on what you're going through, the outside world, because there has been a lot of progress, but we still have a long way to go when it comes to stigma and just not believing people when they tell you they're experiencing something. To have somebody who you can meet with on a regular basis, who is joining with you, validating you, and it's like, I see you, I hear you, like, I cannot believe that, I believe you, like, that in of itself can be so pivotal in somebody's healing. So I'm just so glad that you mentioned that, because I was literally just talking about that today to a friend of mine about their daughter who is 11 and she's in therapy now. And I was like, I bet you the biggest thing she's getting out of this space is to have somebody that she can just talk to that's just for her. So I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then you built like this trust of wanting to, because I know I've had therapists that I did not find safe. Right. To where when they did offer those coping skills, I was like, I don't want to do, I don't believe you. I don't think that's going to work for me.
Right. There's the
so you're right. It does give you that trust and that space to want to take on those additional coping skills and different techniques.
Yeah, and it's hard for it's supportive as family is and can be. It's hard for them to give you that therapeutic thought. They can't. I mean, it's hard for them to separate it.
Honestly, that's not their role. Like, they're not, your family is not your therapist. Your friends are not your therapist. They're not, they can't look at you in that way and kind of separate themselves from you. They're going to give you a certain kind of advice and they're going to tell you to do a certain type of thing. And a therapist or some other mental health trained professional is going to give you something different. And neither one is good or bad. It's just, what you're going to get from family and friends, you'll get something different from a therapist.
I think that that's super important to say, especially within our community. And we know how, mental health is it's definitely more of a conversation, and going to see a counselor and saying that you're going to see a counselor is nowhere near as taboo, as it used to be. But just kind of like reiterating the fact that, you can talk to your cousin or your friend or whoever, but they have people, they have real life people who are trained up in this area. And I'm sure that they have talked to and helped other people in similarly situated circumstances with success. So it's like, why not go to that trained professional who can actually get you some results, like a change in your experience?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, this was a very powerful conversation. I do thank you, ladies, for joining us in this conversation. If you don't mind sharing how the audience can best connect with you.
Sure. My website is ejcounselingatl.com.
Awesome. And Paige, before you share, would you mind just sharing for the people, what your organization does?
Yeah, absolutely. So I myself provide mental health coaching, which is just simply using my lived experience to have those basic conversations like, what were your challenges today, right? Just keeping it very simple, being able to use what I've learned to be helpful, talking about those certain coping skills and things like that. So that's one part. And then another part are the speaking engagements where I just go and share my story. We have a really good question and answer and just attack those stigmas of, well, we're not supposed to talk about this in our community, right? We're not supposed to share our family's business. I'm sharing all the business, and that's just what I'm focused on doing. That's my job. And then outside of that, I do workshops as well, again, where I use my lived experience just to teach the basics of mental health one-on-one. So we keep it very simple, but I also believe that that's important because our community really, we don't know the basics. So being able to keep it simple allows for that conversation to flow freely, and it gives people the opportunity to ask those questions. So that's that.
Amazing. So how can we reach you if we want to connect?
Oh, yeah, that part. Okay. So my social media is 911 Sane Jane, and my website is 911 Sane Jane, and my email is sj@911 Sane Jane. So I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Google, and any other TikTok. Oh, don't expect a video on TikTok, but you can find my name on TikTok, and maybe in the future it'll pop up on your timeline. But yes, I'm everywhere.
I love the way you said that. Awesome.
So this is the part of the segment where we get into some reflective thought. Self-care is important and helps smooth out the edges of our daily experiences. However, we also have to recognize the life challenges that are more stressful and can be identified as triggers that directly impact us. And once we do this, we can begin to do the work on coping strategies to help ourselves mindfully pull back, heal, and move forward.
And our tip of the day is that there is power in choice, but the realization that you need support, guidance, and advice and help are very necessary to your mental health wellness and journey. Our show notes will include a list of national support resources from the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and a crisis text line, which are both resources that are available 24 hours, 7 days a week. If you want to start with self-care, again, you can stop by any of our friendly vendors at the race booth and take it one day at a time and keep it simple, just like Erica said.
That's right. So thank you everyone for spending some time with your listening ears. Check out our show notes for information, the links referenced within the episode, and check out our website, queenbeautypodcast.com. And please send us any comments or questions to queenbeautypodcast@gmail.com.
And a little known fact, Queen Beauty Podcast has a Queen Beauty Podcast Cares initiative going on where we offer financial assistance for those who are seeking counseling services. So please check out our website or our social media to find out more information about that, to apply or donate. Please leave a 5-star rating and review on your socials. And you can find us at Instagram or Facebook at Queen Beauty Podcast. A special shout out to our fabulous 17-year-old podcast editor, Shania, who is the daughter of Quandress at Princess Lay. And we are very happy to have her doing the worker bee work on our editing. So see us back here soon for some quality time with Queen Beauty Podcast. Peace and love.